Nowadays, we can easily get updates to fix broken games via the internet, but a few decades ago, this wasn't something you could just do. So let's talk about a few ways game developers updated their games back in the day. Animal Crossing has become one of Nintendo's most popular franchises, with its first game being released way back in 2002 on the GameCube. Well, it's the first game if you're not from Japan. The first game in Japan is a game called Dobutsu no Mori, which translates to Animal Forest, released back in 2001 on the Nintendo 64. Dobutsu no Mori was a very late Nintendo 64 game, being released only a few months before the release of the GameCube. Animal Crossing was never a particularly impressive looking game, and that's because it was made for a console from the previous generation. So hey, at least it has an excuse, unlike some other games. Once the GameCube came out though, Nintendo figured they should double dip on their content and update the game for the new console. So only 8 months after Dobutsu no Mori was released, Japan got an updated port of the game on the GameCube called Dobutsu no Mori Plus. While the game is not visually impressive for its time, the game does look better than the N64 version, with several of the characters even getting slightly updated designs. Dobutsu no Mori Plus introduced some new villagers too, including fan favorites you've definitely heard of like Flossie, Yodel, oh yeah, and that one character you should definitely not look past the first page of Google on. This game also introduced some staple special characters like Kapp'n and Mayor Tortimer, as well as some new places like the museum where you can donate creatures you've caught, the Able Sisters tailor shop where you can design clothes, and the island where you can meet exclusive Islander characters. Almost a year after Dobutsu no Mori Plus was released, the game got a localization for North America, which became the game we know as Animal Crossing. But if you thought that this was just an English version of Dobutsu no Mori Plus, you'd be right. Except no, you're actually wrong, because there's a ton of cool updates that the American version of this game got. The first being that some holidays were removed, and there's also several new holidays. Dobutsu no Mori Plus has several events that are based on special days in Japan, like White Day. In Japan on Valentine's Day, girls send gifts to guys. Gentlemen return the favor by giving the ladies gifts a month later on White Day. White Day is not as big as Valentine's Day in Japan, and in recent years, White Day is not as popular as it was a few decades ago, so that makes Dobutsu no Mori Plus something of a time capsule. In Dobutsu no Mori Plus, girl villagers will send boy player characters gifts on Valentine's Day, and boy villagers will send girl player characters gifts on White Day. In Animal Crossing, instead, everyone sends gifts to the player characters on Valentine's Day, and White Day is removed from the game. One of the new holidays that Animal Crossing got is the Harvest Festival, which is based on the American Thanksgiving holiday. In this event, there's tables set up with tons of food at the wishing well. There were other changes made in Animal Crossing to essentially westernize the game, like some items, places, and even characters getting redesigns. There were also completely new characters, those being Franklin the Turkey and Farley. There were new items too, like the backyard themed furniture. Oh, and how could I forget the most important update? In-game e-reader support. I'm sure there's at least someone out there who cares about that. All in all, I'd say it was a really cool updated version. Nintendo must have thought so, because less than a year after Animal Crossing came out, Nintendo released another Japanese version of the game called Dobutsu no Mori E+. This version added in content from the North American version of Animal Crossing, like the new holidays, as well as some completely new content, including new villagers like Agent S, Ketchup, and Marina. That E+ at the end of Dobutsu no Mori E+ refers to the e-reader Plus, which is an updated version of the e-reader that Japan got called the e-reader Plus, which has the GameCube connectivity that the North American and Australian versions of the e-reader already had. Before, in Dobutsu no Mori Plus, if you wanted access to the e-reader stuff, you'd need a Game Boy Advance to interface with the e-reader. Having the special e-reader cards honestly didn't get you too much, but you could play some minigames and you could play some full NES games. The e-reader is honestly a pretty neat add-on for the Game Boy Advance that allows you to scan these little cards by swiping them like a credit card. And by scanning them, you can get bonus content in games. It's basically like an early version of DLC. The cards came in these little booster packs, kinda like the ones you'd buy for a trading card game. Speaking of trading card games, there are some cards you can scan from the actual Pokemon trading card game in the e-reader. They don't really do anything too special, to be honest. You could potentially get a mini game or a secret move that you can use for the scanned card in the TCG, which is kind of cool, but usually all you'd get is like a little Pokedex entry on your Game Boy Advance. The real fun came from the e-reader DLC for the actual Pokemon GBA games, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. There's a late game location in the game called Moss Deep City, and if you scan a card from the Pokemon Battle E series in the e-reader, you can battle strong trainers in the back room of some old guy's house in Moss Deep City. That sounds really suspicious when I say it out loud, but anyway, I always wondered what this back room was as a kid, so it's nice to finally get some closure. There are also e-reader cards that give you access to some exclusive berries, like the Pumpkin Berry, which can cure a Pokemon of its frozen status, and the Egont Berry, which can cure a Pokemon of its infatuated condition. I think probably the most interesting piece of e-reader content, though, is the Eon ticket. In the US, there were a small handful of places, like at E3 2003 and at select Toys R Us locations, where special Eon ticket e-reader cards were given out to players. You could also get a copy of the Eon ticket in volume 173 of the Nintendo Power magazine. The Eon ticket allows you to go to Southern Island, a special in-game location where you can catch either a Latios or a Latias, depending on which version of the game you have. Latias for Ruby and Latios for Sapphire. You can get to Southern Island in the updated version of the two games, Pokemon Emerald, but first you have to connect a Game Boy Advance with Emerald to a Game Boy Advance with a copy of Pokemon Ruby or Sapphire that already has the Eon ticket and mix records with them, because Pokemon Emerald dropped the e-reader support that was present in Ruby and Sapphire. The e-reader is one of Nintendo's weirdest products, but I do think it's a cool idea. Having trading cards that can be used in a game is a really cool feature. Heck, even Mario got some e-reader love too, because there were e-reader cards released for Super Mario Advance 4, which is a Game Boy Advance remake of Super Mario Bros. 3. Some of these cards contained power-ups, replays of Mario doing a level, or most notably, bonus levels. There were quite a variety of bonus levels that you could play, from remakes of classic levels like 1-1 and 1-2 to difficult challenge levels like Parabeetle Challenge, where you have to get through a level made almost entirely out of Parabeetles. But probably the most interesting of the new bonus levels are the ones that introduce brand new gimmicks to the game, like the level Vegetable Volley, which adds in the vegetables from Super Mario Bros. 2 USA and Charging Chucks from Super Mario World. You've also got the level Swinging Bars of Doom, which adds in Bony Beetles, Thwimps, and Little Sparkies from Super Mario World, Fire Bars from the original Super Mario Bros., and even Flippers from Yoshi's Island. There's some legitimately cool stuff in these levels. It would be a shame if these levels ended up as lost media because of the e-reader being discontinued, but fortunately, Nintendo added these levels into the Wii U Virtual Console and Switch Online versions of the game. Unfortunately, the e-reader never really took off outside of Japan. It wasn't popular in North America, only lasting a little under 2 years, and in Europe they didn't even bother releasing the thing. I think the e-reader was just a little too ahead of its time, but also just a little too behind the times. The idea of using cards for bonus content was cool, but within only a few years, DLC became common practice, allowing people to quickly download new content via the internet. Then you've also got the fact that you needed to actually buy the e-reader, which at about $40 in 2002 is nearly $70 today, is obviously a tall order, especially considering you also need to buy the cards themselves. At this point, all the e-reader is a quirky little peripheral that's fun to look back on, but hey, at the very least, it was a pretty cool way to update video games before the internet.